All right. Well, good morning. We are back at looking at diffusion and osmosis today. Diffusion and osmosis. So, what we're going to focus on and concentrate on are some example questions that will help you to make predictions on what will happen in a certain situation with a cell. So, we're going to switch gears a little bit, and the lesson today is involving some actual predictions of what would happen with cells. Before we start, I want to make sure I'm going to go back to this probably about 10 times today during the lesson. But again, your learning goal is to make predictions on diffusion and osmosis in certain situations. So all your predictions are going to have um, four elements to them, and all four of these elements need to be present in every answer you submit. First of all, you need to describe clearly what is moving, if anything. So if something's moving, you need to make clear what is it that's passing through the membrane. Sometimes there's more than one thing, more than one molecule that will pass through. The second thing is I want a clear description of the direction of movement. So you can describe it in terms of concentrations, or you can describe it in terms of the environment and the cell, as you'll see in a minute. And then the third thing that all good predictions are going to have that I'll be looking for in your answers is I want you to clearly name the process. I want you to name which of these two processes, if any, are taking place in each situation. And then lastly, I want you to remember to state why this process is happening. All year long in science, you know that I've been barking at you to look for cause and effect relationships. And this is one of those classic times where you can see something moving in the background that will help you to understand why something else takes place. What is the cause behind the effect that we see? So we're going to get started with a sample question here. The sample question is, predict what will happen if a cell has a membrane that is impermeable to solute A. That's a really important word. We're going to stop there. I want you to make sure you underscore this, that you understand what that means. If something is impermeable to something else, it means that that particular solute, in this case solute A, is not able to pass through the cell membrane. And that's true in both directions. Let's continue on with the question. The question says there is a high concentration of solute A building up outside of the cell in its environment. And we want to predict what will happen under this situation. I've got a little saying here that I love to use in math and science. You probably heard me say it a lot of times this year. When in doubt, draw it out. When in doubt, draw it out. A picture is worth 1,000 words, and our pictures are what we think in. If I say to you the word elephant, if I say elephant, you saw a picture of an elephant in your mind. You didn't see ELEPHANT. You actually saw an elephant. And drawing this situation here will help you to predict what will happen next. So we're going to do just that, and I suggest you do a short sketch for yours. So according to the question starts off with a cell. We're not told whether it's an animal cell or a plant cell. We're also told that the cell membrane is impermeable to solute A. Okay, so what that means is this cell membrane will not allow solute A to pass through. The question, again, also states, so we're going to describe the environment here. So here's the environment. It states that in its environment, there is a buildup or a higher concentration of solute A in the environment of this cell. Now, I want to stop here just for a second while I'm drawing these in and let you know that the environment doesn't necessarily have to be like what we're used to in terms of our environment. And we think about, oh, maybe the forest, the trees, a grassland, that type of thing. The environment for a cell could be your stomach. This could be the interstitial tissue, the space between your organs. This could be the tubes of a nephron or something like that in the kidney. All right, so environment doesn't necessarily mean a pond. Now, it could be a pond. Let's say this was a unicellular organism and its environment is pond water. That could be true. But it could also be individual cells inside of a multicellular organism. Okay, so we're going to use environment to mean whatever the outside or the exterior part is surrounding a cell or a group of cells. So we know that this cell membrane is impermeable to solute A. We also know that nature has a way of achieving equilibrium, and all of these solutes are going to want to pass through into the cell to be able to balance out the concentration. So right now, inside and outside have a concentration difference. So outside the cell, there's a high concentration of A. Inside the cell, there's a low concentration of A. So solute A is going to want to move from high to low. The problem is this cell membrane is impermeable to solute A. So in order to achieve equilibrium, something else needs to take place. In order to balance out the concentrations, something else has to happen. I want you to stop for a second and think, what could it be? What could the other process be? Well, if you're thinking osmosis, you are absolutely right. So water from inside the cell is going to pass through this cell membrane through the process of osmosis. And the reason water is going to pass through is because nature will still want to achieve equilibrium and have equal concentrations. So think about what's going to happen to this cell. This cell will probably start to shrivel. It may lose a little bit of water until it can be replenished or until the concentrations even out. So that's a normal process that happens regularly, and it's not necessarily a bad thing for that to happen to a cell. All right, so think back to how I described what happened. Water is going to move. It's going to move through the process of osmosis from inside the cell to outside the cell in order to balance out the concentration. Let's see if I hit all the targets. If I hit all of those criteria. I kind of think I did, because if I didn't, I don't know what I'm talking about. So here's my criteria in green. What's going to move? Water will move. It's going to move from low concentration of solute A to high concentration of solute A. Now, when you're hitting this criteria, criteria number 2, you can describe it by concentration of the solutes, or you can describe it by placement in the environment or relative to the cell, that type of thing. The third criteria, I named the process. I told you it's happening through osmosis. So osmosis is going to happen. And I told you why it's happening. It's happening because there's a higher concentration outside the cell, and the cell membrane is impermeable to solute A, so it's there has to be equilibrium through a different way. Let's try example number 2. So example number 2, again, when in doubt, we're going to draw this out. So I'm going to draw this one as we go here. Predict what will happen if a cell has a membrane that is permeable to solute B. Okay, so this time the membrane that we're talking about is actually permeable to solute B. That means that it can pass through the cell membrane in both directions. And there's a high concentration of solute B building up inside the cell compared to its environment. Now, that has set the stage for everything we need. So let's draw this situation out. So this time we have, I don't know, I'm going to draw like a little bit of a plant cell here instead. Okay, and I'm going to draw my cell membrane this way instead. I got the cell wall there. So here we have the cell membrane. I'm drawing it as a dashed line this time. And the reason I'm drawing it as a dashed line is because it happens to be permeable to solute B. Now it could be potassium, it could be sodium. Solute B could be, any kind of protein or an enzyme, something like that, that is built up inside this cell. The question says there's a high concentration of B on the inside compared to the outside. Exaggerate that a bit more. Okay, so high concentration of B inside the cell. In the environment, there's a low concentration of solute B. So our prediction then needs to include what will happen if this is the starting point. Stop for a second and think, okay, this cell membrane is permeable to solute B. I should actually be saying it's solute B that is permeable to the cell membrane, but you know what, that's okay. We're not going to get too picky about how to use the word permeable. The important thing is that you understand what it means. So in this situation, what will happen? What is your prediction? Number one, what's going to move? Solute B is going to start to pass through the cell membrane. Okay, and it's going to move from high concentration to low concentration through the process of diffusion in order to balance out the concentration in the environment, in order to achieve equilibrium. Now, if you're listening carefully, you'll notice that I actually hit all four criteria in what I just told you. I told you that solute B is going to move through the process of diffusion from inside the cell to the environment, or from an area of high concentration to low concentration of solute B, through the process of diffusion, and lastly, in order to achieve equilibrium. So there's those answers and the criteria that are there. Solute B is going to move this time. It's going to move from inside the cell to outside the cell. That's called diffusion, and it happens to balance out the concentration of solute B, or you could say to lower the concentration of solute B inside the cell. That would also be a way of describing why it's happening. So today we have the first of a few short predictive questions. These are kind of like entrance slips or exit slips. They're worth 20 marks each. I'm going to give you 3 or 4 of them through the next couple days. You need to make sure that you have all 4 of those criteria in your answers. They're worth 20 marks each. Altogether, they'll be worth a little bit less. So they'll be worth probably about 80 marks, 100 marks over the next few days. Make sure you keep on going back to the video from yesterday. If you forgot the mechanics of this, go back, look at the video from yesterday's lesson so that you can understand diffusion and osmosis. Have a good day. I'll give you number 2 tomorrow.